Okay, so a few weeks ago, I put out a video about how upcoming video games get absurd amounts of hype, only to often fail to live up to those expectations. Minutes after I finished the final edit of that video, the game Cyberpunk 2077 actually launched on PC. After taking a short nap to rest my weary head, I proceeded to download the game and begin my cybertastic journey.
Hello there, Night City! Stanley here with you, and we got another day ahead of us in this city of dreams. Ooh, I love this town. Love it like you might.
Now, I didn't expect the world from the game. I would have been more than happy with a standard RPG with some FPS elements, and as you can probably tell from the tone of that video, my hype was not off the charts. But once I was in the game, I knew something was different. The next few days, I did nothing but play Cyberpunk. It was easy to sit down, and the hours would fly by as the night turned into day. The visual design, well, it's something else. Good graphics are always nice, but even by the third or fourth day, I couldn't help but just stare at this. I encountered a few glitches and a few bugs, but nothing close to game-breaking. The frame rate would stay stable the entire way through. Yes, this was something I would have been entirely happy to be hyped about for 8 years. Something I can't say about any game I've ever played before. But then when I went online to see what the reaction from the general masses was, well, yeah. Given the video I made about not getting overhyped and disappointment, I expected a few articles about the game failing to live up to expectations. What I did not expect, though, was that. A seemingly unanimous conclusion that this game was a scam, a broken, falsely advertised pile of Johnny Silver shit. Now, this was a pretty far cry from my take on the game. When I dug a little bit deeper, it seemed that a lot of this hate was primarily targeted towards certain platforms, certain console platforms. Yes, even on next-gen hardware, many people found themselves disappointed that the visual fidelity was downgraded from the advertised material. On the oldest boxes, it didn't run the game at all. I realized I missed one important detail in that last video, a detail that now is often forgotten and calls for optimization and false advertising, and that's about the developer itself, CD Projekt Red. CD Projekt Red doesn't make games for consoles. Yes, the games are on consoles, but much like your Valves or your Crytek's, or any of these cutting-edge games of the early 2000s, CD Projekt Red targets high-end PCs first, and then scales them down to run on other platforms. This is important, because even the newest fancy boxes from Sony and Microsoft are still far behind the offerings of, say, this. And while that disparity is usually shown only in frame rates and resolution, and maybe slightly better textures, this game, well, oof. And this may be the only case in which one of those kind of games launched on PC and console at the same time. Nearly every AAA game is developed for the most popular platforms first, the console market. You start with the lowest common denominator and you can scale up from there. This means level design, geometric complexity, and much more start right here. The only question that matters is, can it run on this box? If you run it on higher-end hardware, you might see a few benefits beyond the obvious resolution and frame rate differences. Better level of detail, better effects, more AI, and even better physics and collision, if so desired. But the core game is based around this platform still. CD Projekt Red doesn't do that. They actually do the exact opposite. The vision for the game starts at the top. What is possible on the best hardware on the market? Not even hardware that's available now, but hardware that might be available in the future. From there, the vision is scaled down to run on other platforms. But it isn't as simple as just lowering the level of detail or effects or draw distances. Sometimes things can break in between. As I said, this isn't too popular today, but it's not entirely uncommon in the industry, at least a few decades ago. The difference is these most technically demanding games of their time did not have a console counterpart, and if your PC couldn't run it, well, that's on you. And this seems to be the biggest misunderstanding about what went wrong about Cyberpunk 2077. It's not a game that is made to run on these boxes. Given the developer's history, it never seemed like it was. We now find ourselves in a tragic position where this game is like the world getting hyped up for Quake 2 RTX, only to realize they probably can't run it. So yeah, in the past few weeks, we've seen the gamers rise up in response to all this. After the calls to action, the refunds offered, and even removal from the PlayStation Store, I think it's safe to assume that there's a lot of blame to go around. Now, it should be stated, I did expect this to happen. I'm not going to feign objectivity on this one. I played the game on a custom rig that cost nearly 10 times as much as these next-gen consoles. That's why my experience was the way it was. The issue, though, is the game costs the same price regardless on which platform you buy it on. There's a lot of shady, misleading shit going down at CD Projekt Red. See, the console market is huge, especially these platforms. And even if it's not CD Projekt Red's primary demographic, the number crunchers surely saw that losing this player base would be a huge missed opportunity, given that the recent delay was primarily towards the console versions of the game. I'm sure that management was unwilling to accept the fact that these versions did not work. This was known beforehand. Even still, Microsoft and Sony were completely willing to double down on the game. This isn't a black and white issue though, at least in my mind. CD Projekt Red's management certainly deserves all of the shit they're getting for this. But again, the expectation that this game would look anything like this on older hardware is absurd. Now, I will address what I'm certain is the most popular argument towards why this game should run on these boxes. The argument being that these games look this good, so why can't this run on it? Most often cited are your Last of Us 2s, your Ghosts of Tsunamis, and Red Ball Redemption Dos. Granted, these games look great, especially considering the age of the platforms they are running on, but it comes with a major caveat. Last of Us 2 and Uncharted and Gears of War are comparatively hyper-linear titles. Virtually everything is pre-calculated and determined by artist intent. This is all about density, the ability to pack a small area with things that look nice. But regardless of the platform, you can't just pack everything in at once. Designated areas are given where the game can catch up to what the player is about to do. This is why in open world games like Red Dead, you have these wide open spaces. It's areas where the next few levels can be loaded in while the player is in a less demanding area. It's massive gaps in density with relatively low geometric detail, so the game doesn't chug to a crawl and the hardware can catch up. The problem is, in Night City, no such area exists. From the moment you enter the city, each block is packed horizontally and vertically with a lot of things. Even turning a corner off the main streets into an alleyway results in a lot of stuff going on. Attempting to load in more detail here would make the game stutter far too often to be playable. This is what happens when the game's development starts from the top. The question asked is, can this run this? And whether this can run it is more or less irrelevant. I mean, take a look at the minimum recommended PC specs, and it far outclasses these boxes. Now, running Cyberpunk on a minimum spec PC is probably not a great idea, and so running it on this is a flat-out terrible idea. This is what leads me to believe that porting these games to these machines was definitely not a decision made by the developer, but instead those who managed the money. Now, the next-gen consoles do fare better, with access to significantly better CPUs and SSDs that are close to the target platform. Glitches and bugs seem a lot better on these consoles, however visually the game does lag behind the promotional material. Now the reason for this? Well, it's actually two major features that this game kind of relies on. Yes, our friend ray tracing and DLSS. Yes, these are products of software, but they require dedicated components within the GPU. Now, the GPU, or graphics processing unit, on these consoles are made by AMD, a company that doesn't really have a great solution to achieving these concepts or results. So why does this matter? Ray tracing has been in this game and that game, and bloobly game. Why does it matter now? Well, usually it's mostly an atmospheric touch, but the potential has always been there to do much greater things. In Night City, the general vibe is that of shiny neon shiny stuffs. Materials that are perfectly suited for this real-time reflective nature. The use of ray tracing in this game is by far the most I've seen in a AAA multi-platform release. Sadly, as I said, AMD graphic cards do not appear to handle ray tracing well at all, even on the newest cards. Console launch titles that heavily promoted the use of ray tracing ended up featuring it at lower settings than the PC version's lowest settings. And so if you are playing on these platforms, any hopes of a next-gen update should definitely be toned down, because the primary lighting technique that makes this game look this good just isn't possible on these boxes. And even then, it's incredibly demanding. With that comes DLSS, or Deep Learning Super Sampling. This allows a game to render at a lower resolution than the desired output, and then upscale it using machine learning and neural network fun things. All you need to know is it means a game can look better and run better with lower performance costs. This boosts frames up to 200% or more. It really is that big of a deal. But again, AMD doesn't have a good solution to this, and much like ray tracing, it means the consoles are out of luck again. It's hard to overstate how important these two features are to Cyberpunk's visual design. You remove one or the other, and everything does seem to fall apart. And as such, most of the marketing shows the game running on graphics cards that support this. NVIDIA graphics cards. Yes, this is why the game has such a heavy presence on NVIDIA's marketing outlets. Adding the disclosure of this game requires a GPU that costs twice as much as a console to look this good isn't going to get that many people excited, and it's probably not going to result in as many sales, but it's definitely more honest. So what now? The conversation around the future of Cyberpunk seems to rely on optimization, a concept that's misunderstood by a lot of people. Optimization isn't a synonym for "it doesn't run on my machine." A game that looks visually stunning comes at a cost, a huge performance cost. Now, actual optimization is required a lot of the time. Crysis runs like shit to this day because it tends to use only a single CPU core, rather than the multi-cored CPUs we have today. A game's performance can be dictated by just having too much detail where it's unnecessary. This sphere could be a few hundred polygons or a few million polygons. The performance difference is massive, but the game barely looks different at all. But in the terms of Cyberpunk, we're dealing with this issue of scalability. The lowest hardware a game can run at and still be the game. It's a double-edged sword. The final product, the game itself, can be better if it targets higher-end hardware, but it usually results in lower sales, since, well, less people can run it. Unless you just lie and say it can run when it really doesn't. This is why a lot of console players are concerned when future exclusives are coming to older platforms. To run on these platforms, the game will have to make compromises somewhere. This is a genuine concern to people that have just bought a new fancy box. Sure, but these same complaints can be applied to something like Cyberpunk. I'm sure a lot of the concern here is the fact that most people just can't buy new hardware right now. And I'm sure in a year or two, with a few updates, this game will be looked back just like The Witcher 3 is today.